My name is Andy Nye, and I will be presenting on the 1979 discovery of toxic waste in the town of Woburn, Massachusetts. The objectives of this presentation are threefold. First, to explain the origin of the contamination. Second, to discuss the impact that the chemical contamination had on the community. And third, to describe and analyze the EPA's effort to clean the site. As such, I will start with background information and the details of the incident, discuss the health impact the contaminants had, briefly touch on the resulting lawsuit, discuss the EPA's cleanup efforts, and end with a summary. With that, let's begin. Woburn is a small city about 10 miles north of Boston that sits on the Aberjona River. It became an industrial center in the 19th century, with tanneries, flower farms, and chemical processing plants operating in the area. Until 1915, it was actually the largest producer of arsenic-based insecticides in the United States, so the area was primed for contamination. Post-war, Woburn experienced a population boom. The city's water supply was primarily groundwater, and it had been pulling from wells A through F, which you can see on the map to the left. In 1964, the city opened 2 new wells, G and H, to meet increasing water consumption needs. Importantly, these 2 wells drew from a different aquifer than the existing wells, and the water from G and H was mixed in with the water supply pulled from A through F. Almost immediately, the residents complained about the appearance, taste, and odor of the new water. And in 1979, after 184 barrels of chemical waste were found dumped nearby the 2 wells, the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Quality Engineering launched an investigation. Water in both wells tested high in trichloroethylene, or TCE, tetrachloroethylene, or PCE, and other volatile organic compounds. As you can see in the table, the 1981 report on the testing identified 7 important chemicals, with well G being particularly hard hit. Of note are the levels of TCE, PCE, and dichloroethylene, all of which tested above the maximum contaminant level set by the EPA. TCE is currently listed as a known human carcinogen by both the International Agency for Research on Cancer and the EPA, and PCE is classed as a likely carcinogen by the EPA and designated Group 2A by the IARC. The wells were immediately shut down, and the EPA added the site to its priorities list in 1983. But unfortunately, the damage had already been done. The same 1981 report noted that there were 12 cases of childhood leukemia diagnosed between 1969 and 1978 in Woburn, when statistically only 5.3 were expected. Renal cancer diagnoses spiked among adults as well. 30 cases were diagnosed between 1969 and 1978, when only 19.4 were expected. You can see on the chart to the left the stark difference between the observed number of cases and the expected number. These 2 charts further break down the 12 leukemia cases by sex and age group. You can see that boys were affected more than girls, but the distribution was spread relatively evenly between the age groups, though it is worth noting that the 3 female cases all occurred in the 10 to 14 age group. Shockingly, later studies found that 28 total cases of childhood leukemia were diagnosed between 1966 and 1986 in Woburn. The geographic distribution of cases is seen in red on this map, with a dense cluster occurring in the southeast around Whitemore Pond. The location of wells G and H are included in green for reference. In 1982, 8 affected families, most from the Whitemore Pond cluster, brought suit against W.R. Grace and Beatrice Foods, 2 companies that had been improperly disposing of chemicals in the area. In 1984, Unifirst Corporation was added to the lawsuit. Unifirst settled prior to the trial for $1 million, but in a controversial decision, the judge ordered the jury midway through the trial to determine if the 2 remaining defendants could be held liable for polluting the groundwater before proceeding to the next phase, in which evidence that the pollution had caused leukemia was to be presented. Beatrice Foods was acquitted and thus didn't need to continue to the second phase, but W.R. Grace was found responsible and did. Grace settled prior to the second part of the trial for $8 million. Though Beatrice was acquitted at trial, the EPA later concluded that all 3 companies were responsible for the groundwater contamination. The case was immortalized in Jonathan Harr's 1995 book A Civil Action, and the 1998 movie of the same name, starring John Travolta. The EPA finished the remedial investigation in 1986, and the record of decision in 1989. 5 properties were identified for cleanup. The process was divided into 4 operable units. OU1 focused on decontaminating the properties, OU2 on addressing groundwater contamination, OU3 on decontaminating the water and sediment of the Aberjona River, and OU4 on decontaminating additional properties southwest of the wells. To date, 1 billion gallons of groundwater have been pumped from the 5 properties for treatment. 2.8 tons of chemical contaminants have been removed from the pumped water. 3,500 tons of contaminated soil has been excavated, and 2,600 tons of mixed soil and sludge have been cleared. Interestingly, the data presented in the 5-year reports show the maximum detected levels seeming to rise in some of the monitoring wells. The TCE levels in Wildwood, for example, jumped from 3,600 parts per billion in 2004 to 21,000 in 2019. The EPA notes that these are maximum detected levels, however, and the average detections are steadily decreasing. In all, they believe that the recovery effort has so far been incredibly effective. In fact, an area of publicly owned land next to the wells has been transformed into the Aberjona Nature Trails, a park and recreational area. In 2008, the EPA approved the construction of a youth hockey center, Holland Arena, on the southwest properties. And between 2014 and 2019, a development company purchased the Grace property and constructed the Woburn Landing Complex, a commercial area consisting of a hotel and several restaurants, a picture of which you can see to your left. To sum up, the VOC contamination in the groundwater at Woburn was caused by improper disposal of chemicals, perhaps reaching back to the 19th century, but certainly caused in part by Beatrice Foods, W.R. Grace, and UniFirst Corp. The lawsuit, though acquitting one of the primary polluters, is nonetheless a landmark toxic tort, and the EPA's cleanup has made substantial progress despite maximum detected contaminant levels seeming to rise at times. Thank you very much for listening.